Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation. In this case, we're going to discuss gerunds. We're going to talk about them, maybe give some facts, and then we're also going to make a little contrast between the gerund in English and the gerund in Spanish. So let's begin. First, we need to consider what is a gerund. Well, a gerund is a verb form that ends with ing in English and ando or yendo in Spanish. It often functions as a noun, especially when describing an activity or an action in general, but it can also be used in forming continuous tense. In both English and Spanish, gerunds are used to form continuous or also called progressive tenses, indicating actions that are in progress. We're going to consider some of the cases where we have the continuous tenses. In English, we have three: present continuous, where in its structure we find a subject plus the present form of the verb to be plus the verb with the ing. For example, I'm studying. We also have the past continuous, which also contains a subject plus the verb to be in the past, which will be was or were, plus the verb with the ing. For example, they were working. And lastly, we find the future continuous, which also in its structure contains the subject plus the verb to be in the future will be plus the ing form. For example, she will be traveling. In Spanish, we have its equivalents, which will be, for example, an equivalent for the present continuous, the presente progresivo, which has in its structure a subject plus estoy, estás, está, estamos, están, wherever conjugating form we need, plus the verb with its suffix ando, yendo, for example, estoy estudiando. Then we have pretérito imperfecto progresivo, which will be the equivalent for the past continuous. We also have the subject plus estaba, estabas, estaba, estábamos, estaban, plus the verb with its suffix ando or endo. An example would be ellos estaban trabajando. And then we have the future futuro progresivo, which will be the equivalent for the future continuous. We have the subject plus estaré, estarás, estará, estaremos o estarán, plus the verb with ando, endo suffix. For example, ella estará viajando. Some key differences we can notice here is that, for example, in English, the verb to be changes based on the tense and the subject. And in Spanish, the verb estar changes based on tense, person, and subject, but the gerund itself, the verb with ando, endo suffix, doesn't change. Both languages use these forms to emphasize actions that are, in this case, occurring at a specific moment or over a period of time. That is why we call them progressives. Considering the Spanish gerund, we say that the Spanish gerund is quite unlike the ing form because it serves as a gerund in the present participle. She's swimming, ella está nadando. As also, it serves as a noun. Swimming is fun, nadar es divertido in Spanish. An adjective, a fascinating story, una historia fascinante. It is theoretically a kind of adverb and can therefore properly only modify verbs but not nouns. These sentences must usually be translated by a relative clause. For example, necesitamos una chica que hable francés will be translated into we need a girl who speaks French. In this case, we are using a relative clause in the translation. Now, as regards the form of the gerund, we have to consider verbos infinitivos in Spanish. All those verbs that end in ar would be translated, or the ar part will be replaced by ando. In this case, we have two examples. The first one, hablar, to speak, will become hablando. Contar, to tell, will become contando. And then those verbs in the infinitive that end with er or ir conjugations will be replaced by the ending yendo. For example, temer, to fear, will become temiendo. Vivir, to live, will become viviendo. And producir, to produce, will become produciendo. Now, taking into account the basic uses of the gerund, We have some different uses we're going to consider. The first one is gerund used to modify the main verb. In this case, this gerund functions like an adverb. It may be used to indicate simultaneous action. Like, for example, se fue gritando, he went off shouting. The next use is when we have a gerund that it's indicating method. The gerund may indicate the method by which an action is performed. In English, it usually requires the preposition by. For example, te puedes poner en contacto conmigo llamando a este número will become you can contact me by ringing this number. Also, when we consider the gerund to express purpose, in Spanish we will have para plus the infinitive. This construction occurs with verbs of communication. For example, nos llamó pidiendo or para pedir dinero. He rang us asking or to ask for money. Another use is the gerund to express concession. In this case, in Spanish, we will use aunque plus a finite verb. In Spanish, the Spanish gerund occasionally signifies although, often in combination with aún, even. Like, for example, siendo inteligente como es, parece tonto, although intelligent, he looks stupid. Aún estando enfermo, nos resulta útil. He's useful to us, even though he is ill.
Like the English ing form, the Spanish gerund can also indicate an action performed by the direct object of certain kinds of verbs. For example, in A, we have with verbs of perception like see, hear, observe, and in B, we have with verbs like coger, pillar, to catch, arrestar, to arrest, dejar, to leave, encontrar, to find, sorprender, to surprised. And for example, we have la cogió o pilló robando, he or she caught her stealing in English. And also in C, we have with verbs of representation like paint, draw, photograph, show, describe, imagine, and represent. And for example, esta fotografía muestra al rey bajando del avión. In Spanish would be this photo shows the king getting out of the plane. After that, we have gerund after verbs of perception like see, hear, etc. We have that commonly after the verb to see, that is ver, and occasionally after oír, to hear, recordar, to remember, olvidar, to forget. The gerund may be used to qualify the object of the main verb. Usually, the infinitive is also possible in this construction, the difference being one of aspect. The infinitive indicates an action that is completed, and the gerund an action that is or was not yet complete. Let's see this example that says, la vi fumando un cigarrillo in Spanish, and in English would be, I saw her while she was smoking a cigarette. Another example would be, la vi fumar un cigarrillo, I saw her smoke a cigarette. There is usually a colloquial alternative which use a finite verb. La vi que fumaba un cigarrillo, and in English would be, I saw that she was smoking a cigarette. With verbs of motion, the gerund is usually not possible. Let's see this example that says, I saw him coming towards me. Lo vi que venía hacia mí, but not lo vi viniendo hacia mí. Then we have oír, hear, may take a gerund, but prefers either the infinitive or the construction with que and a finite verb. The infinitive is the safest option for foreign learners. A gerund could be taken to refer to the subject of the main verb. For example, la oí entrando could mean I heard her while I was entering. But the gerund is possible if its subject is inanimate. For example, cuando el sargento oye la corneta tocando la retirada, in English would be when the sergeant hears a trumpet sounding the retreat. Other uses of the gerund would be gerund with ir. In A, we have expresses slow or gradual action. For example, in Spanish, cada vez voy teniendo menos memoria. In English, my memory is getting worse and worse. In B, we have by extension to express careful, painstaking, or laborious actions. In Spanish, we have ya puedes ir preparando todo para cuando lleguen. In English, you can start getting things ready for when they arrive. Then we have gerund with quedarse. This translates the idea of to continue to do something. For example, se quedó mirándome in Spanish, and in English, she remained staring at me. And the last one, we have gerund with venir to express an action that accumulates or increases with time. It sometimes conveys mounting exasperation. For example, in Spanish, hace años que viene diciendo lo mismo. In English, he has been saying the same thing for years. Then I would like to continue with translating the ing form. And we have that these examples consist mainly of cases where the English ing form may not be translated by the Spanish gerund. For example, when the ing form is the subject of a verb. This is normally translated by an infinitive or by a suitable noun. For example, learning a language is fun in English. In Spanish, aprender un idioma es divertido. No smoking, prohibido fumar. Salmon fishing is an art. La pesca del salmón es un arte. Another one would be when the ing form is the object of a verb. In this case, there are two possibilities. In A, when the same subject performs both actions, use an infinitive or a noun. For example, I like swimming, me gusta nadar, o me gusta la natación. In B, when the actions are performed by a different subject, use a clause or noun. I can't stand Pedro singing, no soporto que Pedro cante. I recommended promoting her, recomendé su ascenso o recomendé que la ascendieran. But what happens when the ing form is used in a passive sentence? Well, we need to be careful when the English ing form replaces a passive infinitive. In Spanish, an infinitive or a clause must be used. For example, your hair needs cutting, to be cut. Te hace falta que te corten el pelo o hace falta que te cortes el pelo. You are not worth listening to, no vale la pena escucharte. Then we have the ing form is preceded by prepositions. Unless the preposition is by, an infinitive or clause must be used. For example, I'm looking forward to seeing you. In Spanish would be tengo ganas de verte. Next, the ing form is before nouns. In A, if the ing form itself a noun, translation is usually by an infinitive or a noun. For example, dancing shoes can be translated to los zapatos de baile. In B, if the ing form is a participle, an adjective, then a relative clause may be used unless a participle in ante, yente, exists. For example, a walking doll would be un muñeco andante. But often, an idiomatic solution must be sought in each case. For example, in English, the dining room can be translated to el comedor.